Hey guys, hope all is well. In this video, I'm going to analyze Game 8 of the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Sergei Karjakin, which happened yesterday. It's really been quite an interesting match thus far, but only draws. Through the first 7 games, we'd had 7 draws. Carlsen definitely had his opportunities in rounds 3 and 4 in particular. Karjakin had a great opportunity in, I believe it was round 6, I want to say. No, it must have been round 5. He had one opportunity with black in a previous game where Carlsen pressed with white a little bit too hard. And Carlsen successfully navigated the 2 black games that he had to face in a row against Karjakin in round 6 and 7. So it was finally his chance to sort of get the opportunity of having the first serve again, so to speak. And he decided to open with d4. This was sort of a welcome surprise for me. Or not a welcome surprise, but I definitely was glad that e4 wasn't played because I felt like he was banging his head against the Spanish a little bit, or the Ruy Lopez. And in the game 1, he'd actually played the Trumpowski, which I previously called a red herring opening. I didn't expect it to be played more than once in the event. So after knight f6, he played knight f3. And knight f3 is pretty flexible. I actually use this as a second move quite often myself. And basically the point is to sort of cut out any gambits, like the Benko gambit or the different moves that will come after c4, for instance. Like there's c5, which is the Benko, after d5, b5. There's the Benoni lines like this after e6, which come about too. There's also the Budapest gambit. And so basically you cut out a lot of funny lines with if you play knight f3 first, because it sort of discourages black from playing those types of gambits. Now, this is a world championship match, so I don't think that was the sole purpose of playing c4. My other guess with playing knight f3 first is that, like he did, is that you sort of avoid you avoid certain lines connected with the bishop b4 check. So you avoid certain lines of the Bogo. For instance, if you play c4 here, and then e6, and then knight f3, bishop b4 check is sort of a main line, and you have to sort of block with bishop d2 or knight c3 and get a position that's been well versed. Whereas if you keep the pawn on c4, if you keep the pawn on c2, there's no reason to play this check. So after knight f3, which was played, and then d5, d5 was actually played, but let's say e6 was played. If e3, bishop b4 check is just a bad move, because white could just block with c3, and then this bishop has no reason to go here. A good friend of mine, and a chess coach from North Carolina, has these bishop rules, and one of his bishop rules that he teaches young kids is that you never play a bishop to a place where it can be blocked with a pawn. So you never give a check that can be blocked with a pawn by a bishop. And that's actually a good rule, because bishop b4 check is not good here. So anyways, after knight f3, d5 was played. And this is also a surprise, because I didn't think that Karjakin would go for a Slav. And so, yeah, I was thinking maybe he was going to go for Queen's Gambit decline. And that's why Carlsen's next move was very interesting. He played e3. And I think the main point is to sort of avoid Queen's Gambit acceptance, because if c4 is played next, d takes c4 doesn't make as much sense, because the bishop would have gone to c4 in one move without wasting a tempo. Whereas typically if c4 is played here and then d takes c4, it's a little bit different. Anyways, e3 was played. e6 followed. Sort of expected him to play Queen's Gambit decline type setup. And then bishop d3. And this actually introduces the Kali system. And again, I think it's sort of it's an old opening. It's been played for hundreds of years, but I think it's interesting that it's played here, because it sort of cuts out most of the main theoretical type of openings that have been exhausted, I'm sure, by Karjakin and his team, like the Queen's Indian. And again, bishop b4 check doesn't make much sense here because of c3. So just developing the bishop and sort of keeping your queenside structures flexible is an interesting choice. So Karjakin decides to play c5. If white's not going to take the space with c4, it's sort of the impetus is for black to take the space. And Carlsen goes b3, another interesting move. And now it becomes like a sort of a hybrid Kali system, but with a bishop on b2, and potentially having the bishops on the long diagonals pointing at the king, or the longest diagonals it can pointing at the king, is actually an interesting choice. So b3, bishop e7, castles, castles, bishop b2, and this is all pretty standard here. And b6, and I like b6. It sort of keeps the tension in the center. An argument could have been made that c takes d4 is an option, and I'm not so. I'm pretty sure Carlsen would have taken with the pawn. And although the structure typically is pretty good for black, because black is the kingside pawn majority and can execute a minority attack, it's a little bit different here simply because the bishop on c8 isn't outside of the chain. So it's sort of hard to sort of equalize here with the bishop being so bad. And another point is if b6 was played to try and exchange those bishops with bishop a6, I think queen e2 would be played, stopping that trade. And then this bishop on c8 going to b7 would just be a bad piece. And I think white would retain an advantage after like bishop b7 and perhaps a move like c4. Or he can even slow play with knight bd2. So Karjakin didn't go for that, and instead he went for b6. Here Carlsen decided to take, which I think is a very correct decision. The point is after bishop takes c5, which was played, this bishop on c5 is slightly misplaced. You hear me say a lot in different videos and stuff that the bishop is sort of biting on granite if there are two pawns on the same diagonal as the bishop that are sort of in the way of it. Because basically, in that case, when that happens, the bishop is sort of limited in scope. And this is the case here with the e3 and f2 pawns limiting the c5 bishop. Now, on the other hand, if b takes c5, which is certainly an option, after white could play c4, and after this move, white gets to play against hanging pawns. They're called hanging pawns because typically after c takes d5, let's say if bishop b7 was played, after c takes d5, e takes d5, these are sort of hanging, isolated, well, they're together, but they're sort of hanging pawns in the center, and they're a little bit weaker than normal pawns. And so just take a look at both pawn structures, in fact. Black would have 3 pawn islands between the pawn on a7, the c5 and d5 ones, and then the f7 to h7 pawns. And white would actually only have 2, and that tends to lead for an advantage to white. And so Karjakin just is very, very keen on knowing what Magnus's strengths are, and part of his strengths is playing with static advantages like this. So he decided to play bishop takes e5, even though it's biting on granite. Structurally, it's a little bit healthier, and I think that was an interesting choice. Although it does sort of cede the advantage to white, because after bishop takes, and now knight bd2, white's preparing the c4 move, and the point is that white's going to prepare to capture the pawn on c4 if d takes c4 with the knight, not the bishop. Excuse me. Because if bishop takes c4 was played, let's say h6 and c4, and then d takes and bishop takes c4, this didn't happen, but the bishop on c4 would be biting on granite here, like the bishop on c5. So you sort of want the knight to recapture that pawn instead of the bishop. So that's why knight bd2 was actually played in this position. And after knight bd2, bishop b7 was played, just developing. Queen e2, another useful preparatory move. It also, in some lines, eyes the a6 square. So bishop a6 sometimes becomes an option in some positions. And really, furthermore, just preparing the c4 move slowly, getting the queen outside the line of the other queen on d8 is useful. And finally, also queen e4 introduces the idea of e4 in some positions. If h6, for instance, let's say, e4 here might actually be an interesting move, because after d takes e4, knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, white would actually have a pretty safe advantage here, because white would be first to get to the d file. Although the light squared bishop is gone, the queen would be doing a great job controlling these light squares. And the bishop on b2, again, was much better than its counterpart on c5 because it has a longer diagonal to work with. So all those factors just makes e4 actual option. And so after queen e2, Karjakin went knight bd7, just developing. It's very important that he sort of gets his rooks connected as well and is able to sort of challenge white in the middle of the board. But it's also important to point out here that this position is nearly symmetrical. So if you look at the knights in f3 and f6, they're mirrors. d2 and d7 mirrors, b2 and b7. The real difference here is that the queen is slightly better placed on e2 than the one on d8, and the bishop on d3 is better than the one on c5. So those should translate to a safe white advantage. So here c4 is played finally, and this is basically where Carlsen's play is going to come from. He's going to sort of challenge in the middle and ask black some questions. D takes c4 was played, and the reason it was played is because there's no useful way to meet c takes d5. So let's say h6 was played again. I just keep making that move just as a pass, just to sort of show. If c takes d5, there's no real useful way to capture. Because if bishop takes d5, then white might consider playing e4 and e5 with tempo. And this could be a little bit annoying and dangerous. For example, if e5 here, knight d5, queen e4 already threatens mate, and it would be very uncomfortable. And if the knight was to take on d5, well, then the e4 square is a little bit loose because the knight left it, and now you might entertain moves like knight e4 or knight c4, or white would just have a little edge there as well. And finally, if e takes d5 after c takes d5, white would clearly be playing against the isolated pawn, and already a move like knight d4 is interesting to me, just blockading that. Or even bishop d4 actually is also good. So yeah, those are very key factors. So that's why d takes c4 is played. And now again, we said bishop takes c4 is not the idea, but knight takes c4. And here I liked white position. I thought white had sort of a slight advantage. But Karjakin was doing something very smart. Even though it's clear that white is slightly better, Karjakin was playing very quickly because he knew he'd have to deal with other challenges later in the game. So I noticed here that Karjakin was already up almost 30 minutes on the clock, and it was just very impressive how he was blitzing out the opening, even though he was worse because he knew he had other challenges to solve later. So, queen e7, good move, connecting the rooks. Also introducing the idea of bishop a3 sometimes if the knight ever leaves c4. And now a3, a very good move. I think it more or less forces black response because b4 is a serious threat here. And the reason it's a threat is because then the bishop would have to go back to d6, and white would take that in a heartbeat. So if like h6 again, b4, bishop d6, knight takes, queen takes, and the two bishops here would be a lasting, enduring advantage for white. So that's sort of not something that you want to allow. So here a5 was played. And yeah, now I thought a5 definitely stops b4, but also weakens the b5 square. So I thought knight d4, as Carlsen played, was sort of clever, because now you're sort of eyeing that b5 square at some lines. Note that a move like e5 is sort of off the cards for black, because the knight could come to f5, and that'd be very annoying. Or even b5 as well. But it would be a case of sort of overextending without merit. So after a5, knight d4, rook fd8 was played. Good move, sort of. Black would love to trade a few pieces here, and the first thing you want to do is actually show up your king side a little bit first. So rook fd8 introduces the idea of playing knight f8 and sort of defending the king side. Rook fd1, useful move, also sort of does something similar, just putting a rook to the d file. Although knight b5 here also could have been explored. But anyways, rook fd8, rook fd1, rook ac8, and yeah, Karjakin just sort of sitting on the position a little bit, waiting to see what Carlsen will do. And here, Carlsen played rook ac1, but I think that was a bit of a lazy move and a bit of a mistake. And the reason for it is twofold. One, the rook on c1 was doing a really good job of protecting the a3 pawn, and even though it's natural for the rook to get to the c file like this, now the knight on c4 sort of has to hang tight for a little bit, because the a3 pawn will be hanging. Furthermore, the rook on c1 isn't actually sort of doing that much because the c file is sort of blocked. So it didn't make sense to sort of put it there right away. And finally, time is of the essence, and knight b5 is actually a much stronger move. The reason for this is it already introduces the threat of knight d6. So let's say our favorite waiting move, h6, was played again. Then knight d6 would come, and the problem is that this white would essentially get at least a pair of bishops, because if bishop takes d6, knight takes d6, the knight cannot be captured because of bishop h7 check, picking off the queen. So it would just be a very nasty fork here, securing the two bishops and giving white a long-term advantage. And here, after knight b5, knight f8 would probably have to be played, but again, these knights are doing a very useful job here, and there's some pressure on the d6 square. After rook ac1, there's no real threat. And black just goes knight f8 and says, what are you doing? And here, I think Carlsen sort of missed... the knight f8 move sort of demonstrated that Carlsen missed somewhat of a chance, or opportunity to sort of press a little bit further, because now he starts to change his plan. And that's never a great sign, honestly. Like, if you make some moves and you change your plan, it sort of is a sign that something didn't go quite right. And so here he goes, queen e1. A very weird move. And I think the intention is sort of just to keep pieces on the board, because now he starts to move pieces backward to sort of protect his king side and sort of keep the tension. But Karjakin's just sort of improving, and these aren't objectively the best moves. Knight g6, great move. Now the knight has fully relocated. It was from on b8 and now it's on g6. And I love these knights on f6 and g6. I like to call them Ruy Lopez knights, because sometimes you have them in Ruy Lopez lines where there's, for white, has the knights on f3 and g3. And sometimes you have it in the Italian game as well, and these knights do a really good job of protecting and also potentially attacking some of the weak squares on the king side. This bishop is already glaring at the g2 pawn, and knight h4 might be an idea down the road. That's why Carlsen plays bishop f1, another prophylactic move covering the g2 pawn. But again, it's clear that now he's sort of going in the wrong direction. He's making all these backward moves and sort of huddling on the back few ranks to sort of keep the tension, when he definitely should have been going forward a few moves ago. And now knight g4 is played. Karjakin is seizing his chance. Now that Carlsen is going backward, Karjakin is going forward. So excellent move. Also, just again, eyes h2, eyes f2 with the knight, and also thinks about playing knight e5, exchanging this very strong knight on c4. Carlsen played knight b5 now, but it's really just a few moves too late, probably like 4 moves too late. There's no threat with this move, and it's just another pass to sort of keep the tension, but it's a question of how effective it is. And here, Karjakin played bishop c6, which was rejected wholesale by the engines, because apparently queen g5 was a very strong move here, just sort of putting real pressure on the black king, on the white king here, maybe introducing ideas of knight h4 next. And again, it's not a great sign when there's 4 pieces, and including this bishop on b7, just huddling around the white king. Very uncomfortable. So Karjakin, though, always careful, just plays bishop c6. His objective wasn't initially to do anything spectacular with this game, so he's just going to try and keep with the objective of, holding firm and letting Carlsen sort of create action. a4 is played to sort of keep the knight there. And now bishop d5. Again, a very unambitious move, but sort of just saying, do something, Carlsen, do something. What are you going to do? How are you going to break this position? Because Carlsen so badly wants to win that sometimes he's trying to reach a little bit. And bishop d4 is played. And I think here was sort of an admission that well, I probably need to start trading a few pieces if I'm going to get anywhere. The C and D files are both blocked, and I really need to do something, so I need to clear the way a little bit. So bishop d4 is played, then bishop takes c4. And this was a curious move. Why give up the 2 bishops for no reason? Or why give up a bishop for a knight for no reason? Well, Karjakin likes to defend. That's the only thing I can say. Otherwise, I think there are much better moves to keep the tension. You could have taken on d4 as well. Yeah, but anyways, bishop takes c4 was played. And here was another critical moment. Carlsen played rook takes c4, but in fact, bishop b takes c4 was very interesting here. And the reason it was interesting is because now bishop takes c4 is not such a great move, because after e takes d4, white could probably make a passed pawn, and this bishop on f1 is very strong, and these knights are a little bit clumsy now. There's no attack here. And here, if you don't take, if you play a move like like h6, well, then Carlsen could keep the tension, or even play bishop b2. And now this bishop on c5 is really not very effective, biting on granite like we said. And this bishop on b2 is really enjoying nice scope on the long diagonal. So definitely an option that I think Carlsen should have considered a little bit more. Unfortunately for him, he sort of played rook takes c4 very quickly, and after bishop takes d4, more pieces come off. Here, e takes d4 is not really a move you want to make, because you just basically create an isolated pawn for no reason, and then black can sort of blockade it by putting a knight on d5 and putting pressure there. Instead, Carlsen decided to play rook d takes d4, which I found to be another sort of suspicious move, but it seemed a little bit more natural to take this way and double the rooks like this, but Carlsen has his reasons. And after rook d takes d4, rook takes c4 is played, and again, Karjakin's just trying to trade pieces and make this draw. And here was really one of the critical moments of the game, because Carlsen, in this burning effort to win, plays a move you just shouldn't make. B takes c4. And why shouldn't you make it? Well, you're creating another extra pawn island, and yeah, you might potentially get a pawn break, but it's just not worth it, because long term it's not good to play this way. And let's say that I mean, there's one idea here, I guess. Like if let's say if white could move against, let's say h6, our move, our proverbial pass, c5 here would actually create a pawn lever, because if oh well, not even here it wouldn't. But I was thinking of c5 at some point, b takes c5, rook takes d8, queen takes d8, queen c3. Maybe you get one of these pawns and create some sort of pawn lever. But I don't know. It's a very unclear even here, because after queen b6, I don't see how you're winning the pawn yet. So yeah, okay, maybe knight a3 and some knight c4 maneuver, but again, a little bit too much. And again, if it doesn't work out, it really doesn't work out. So b takes c4 was played. And then knight f6 was played, and already Karjakin is like, oh, exciting, I have a new weakness. If my knight can come to c5, only I can be better, because these pawns are weak. The c4 pawn would be blockaded. This bishop on f1 all of a sudden is a bad piece, because it has no scope on the diagonal because of this c4 pawn. And already envisioning a blockade on the dark squares would be quite nice. So here Carlsen played queen d2, maybe this was his idea, controlling the file, because, again, rook takes d4 is not advisable, because after e takes d4, all of a sudden, white could make a pawn break. So after queen d2, Karjakin effectively played rook b8, just saying, I'm going to give you control of the d file, but nothing more than that. And even though white has control of the d file, there isn't really a great way to break through, because there aren't many good entry squares here. Carlsen played g3. I think it's a good move, redeploying the bishop up from f1 to a diagonal where it can actually do something. And here Karjakin played knight e5, threatening knight f3 check, but also thinking about redeploying the knight to c5 through the d7 square. Bishop g2 was played, and now h6. h6 is a very important move here. If knight d7 was played right away, then actually knight a7 could be played here, and this would actually get a little bit dangerous, because Now the knight c6 fork is a threat, and it's tough to beat. So h6 sort of parries that. And also, knight a7 isn't possible here because the queen is still covering that square. f4. And here I was actually texted a buddy of mine. I was like, man, is Carlsen trying to lose or what? Excuse me, just drinking some tea. I'm a little bit under the weather here. Because f4 it's either going to, I mean, it's just a little bit too weakening. I understand that he wants to win, but this is a world championship match, and guys at this level feast on weaknesses. And f4 just really opens up the king without any immediate return. That's the key thing. There's no immediate return for opening up this king. You're not winning a piece. You're not winning a pawn. So it's tough for me to say f4 is a good move because it's just a little bit too weakening for me. Knight d7 was played, which also helps black a little bit because the knight really wanted to go to c5 anyway. And then here, knight a7, which was, I guess, Carlsen's idea to play knight c6, but it just easily parried. And here, queen a3 was played. And here, look at the difference in coordination. Black is better coordinated than white here. The knight on a7 is not quite well coordinated. The pawns are definitely not well coordinated, having 3 pawn islands to black's 2. And the black king is frankly safer. So you'd have to say white is better here. After queen a3, Carlsen probably should have thought about playing rook takes d7. And then after knight takes d7, queen takes d7, queen takes e3 check. It probably would result in a likely draw after king f1. No, king h1 doesn't make sense because of queen c1, and that'd be checkmate after blocking on f1. And here after king f1, only black can be better because after queen c1 check, king f2, queen takes c4, black has 2 pawns and a rook for the 2 pieces and a safer king. And this is sort of the difference in all the lines, is the safer king. So I can understand why Carlsen didn't go for this because there's no winning chances here. But he probably should have gone for it because he's sort of teetering on being worse. Seriously worse. So instead he decided, instead of rook takes c7, to keep up with his plan, which was knight c6. And black had to play rook f8. Rook c8 did not work because of knight e7. And rook d8 hangs the rook, so rook f8 made the most sense. And here, a4 is hanging still. White still has these weaknesses. I would also say e3 is a slight weakness now and maybe a target to a knight g4 at some point. And so I was not feeling good about Carlsen's position. He played h3. I think it's a good move, actually. Safeguarding the king. Very important here to sort of be able to play king h2, because now that you play this f4 move, the diagonal is, that g1, a7 diagonal for the king is very weak. The e3 pawn is weak. The king needs to be tucked away somewhere. And here, black just played knight c5. And the point is that, again, black has a relatively solid position as white is sort of grasping at straws. Excuse me. Another sip of the tea. And because black is because white is grasping at straws, black is just going to sort of sit on those weaknesses and then eventually exploit them. And that's what happens. After knight c5, Carlsen goes king h2, another prophylactic move. But this just hangs the a4 pawn. And that's what Karjakin just takes it. Knight takes a4. And here, I guess Carlsen's idea was to play with activity now that he's down a pawn. So he goes rook d8. And there are some pitfalls here. For instance, if knight c5 is played, that'd be an awful blunder because of knight e7 check winning the rook. The king would have to move, winning the rook. But again, you see the obvious mistakes that can happen, and then you look over those, and then you see, well, I'm just a pawn up. And so Karjakin plays g6, very cool, calm, collected move, which allows for a king g7 at some point if there's a knight e7 check. It also just says, white, what is your next move? What is your plan? Reveal yourself. Carlsen went queen d4. Again, sort of just a one-move threat, hitting the f6 knight, but very easily parried. Not much of a dynamism to that threat. And after king g7, easily defended. Note that rook takes f8, black would just play queen takes f8, and black's still a pawn up. You can't really exploit this pin yet on with the knight to the king. A move like g4 would just be answered by queen c5, just trying to harass the queen off that diagonal and maybe even trade queens. And all is good for white here, or all is good for black here. So again, Carlsen is, I also want to say, he's in time trouble, but it's really a problem, and it's really a problem that he's sort of trying to win a position that's not quite winnable. And it's compounded by the time trouble, because Karjakin played very quickly from the opening, and it's compounded by, just frustration, because I think Carlsen's been a little bit frustrated with not being able to put more pressure or effective pressure on Karjakin the way he does with other opponents. And here he plays a howler of a blunder, c5. And this move should have just been losing. After rook takes d8 and knight takes d8, Karjakin played knight takes c5, and now he's up 2 pawns, 2 connected passed pawns on the queen side for nothing. Now, Carlsen definitely had an idea here, and he shows it. He plays queen d6. And the idea is actually queen e7, which is a very, very nasty threat. If h5 was played, for instance, queen e7, and it would be white that would be better, almost winning probably, because queen takes f7 check could not be stopped. But in this position after queen d6, black has a winning move that is not so obvious to see, but with time it is fairly obvious. And it's the move queen a4. The point is that now if queen e7, you just meet it with queen d7, and there's no attack on the f7 pawn, and there's just a trade of queens that would be forced, and that'd be the end of the game. Now Karjakin, in sort of mutual time trouble, made a pretty amazing blunder. I say it's amazing because he's calculated so well throughout the event, and he's been able to seize his chances somewhat when he's found them to hold games. So it's amazing that when he's winning, he can't find the move. Particularly because he did have a decent amount of time left. It wasn't like he was down to his last 30 seconds. And he played the move after queen d6, he played the move queen d3. And there's there's a massive flaw, but there's a tiny flaw I think that he underestimated that turned out to be massive. And it's this move, knight takes c6 check. The problem is here in this line, knight takes c6 can't be played because the queen on d3 is hanging. And so f takes c6 is forced. And then after f takes c6, queen e7 check, white gets his piece back. And so king g8 was played, queen takes f6 was played, and now Carlsen made the time control and is not losing. But is still worse, he's just not losing. Amazing turn of events considering he was just dead lost right before the control. So here, Karjakin had one more move to make before move 40, and he played a4. And I think that's a good move, just trying to run your pawn down the board. And here was the first critical position after the time control, because both had gotten the extra time, and it's clear that black is still a pawn up with protected pass pawns. Only black could win. Carlsen needed to try to save the game. His first attempt was to play e4. Great move. It attacks the g6 pawn, and it blocks the protection of it by the queen on d3, and threatens to sort of take all these kickside pawns. So great move. Now queen d7 was played. The queen must come back to sort of defend the king from checks. Queen takes g6, queen g7. And here, now the material is equal, but you can see that now all the endgames start to become really, really bad for white, because trading queens is just out of the question. The two protected pass pawns are just too far advanced. And this bishop on g2 is really not worth its 3 points right now. It's not an active participant in the game. So Carlsen has to keep the queens on at all costs and hopefully get a perpetual. He plays queen e8, queen f8, and then queen c6. The queen endgame is very, very complicated. I think queen b5 might have been a decent try as well, but queen c6 is fine. Excuse me, I have tea here for me. And after queen c6, Karjakin plays queen d8. Very good move. It centralizes the queen a little bit more. It protects the pawn on b6. It controls the d-file, and it sort of keeps everything covered for now. Note that in all positions, it's always important to have as few unprotected pieces as possible. And here, everything is protected for black except the h6 pawn, so that's a very good sign. Here, Carlsen played f5. I think it's a good move. It sort of is trying to open up black's king side a little bit further because there's really only perpetual checks will save white now. And here, Karjakin played a3. Now, the computers, again, they'll say that white can still hold this position, but it's so difficult in the practical game because the drawing margin is so narrow. And Karjakin has a very clear plan of just pushing the pawns. So here already, even if it's holdable, it's tough to say how. F takes e6 was played. It's not yet losing because after a2, if a2 was played, king g7 was played. But if a2 was played, now what is there? There's some move here. I think maybe something like e5 or queen e5 is key. What was the move here? There was some move here. It might actually be e7. Just dislodging the queen from the d-file and also threatening to give some more checks. So those were some ideas there. And that's why Karjakin played king g7, just protecting the last unprotected pawn in the camp, although a3 is protected now. So after king g7, here Carlsen had a decent chance, and he played e7, which I think is a bit of a mistake. Instead, e5 should have been played. And the point is that after a2, there's this move queen f3, and this is sort of the move that would hold the game, because now if queen, there's check, king h8, and e7, and this would effectively hold the balance for white because white would be getting his own queen. So that would mean that promoting would be out of the question. And after queen e7, this would still be quite a complicated position because now the pawn hasn't queened yet, and you could put some more pressure on the queenside pawns before they queen by maybe playing like queen a3 or something like that. Instead, Carlsen played e7, and this sort of allows black to just take this pawn and continue to consolidate. Because after queen takes e7, queen takes b6, now Karjakin plays this super strong move, knight d3. And here, even though this probably could be a draw at best play, I would say practically speaking it's losing. And the reason is this knight, once it gets to e5, blocks the king, protects the king from meaningful checks, and keeps the white bishop really hemmed in. Let's say a move like king h1 was played. It wasn't, but after knight e5, this bishop has a hard time getting in the game, and the knight is doing a great job of effectively attacking and defending. So, really not great here. Carlsen went for queen a5, but not much difference, because after queen c5, now there are no more checks at the moment, and you're threatening to trade the queens, and you're activating the queen closer to helping it control the queening square of a1. Queen a6 was played, and now knight e5, and the coordination between the black pieces is really profound. Everything is sort of really well in place and protected, and even though white is up a pawn, the only thing that matters right now is how far the furthest pawn is, and it's black's pawn on a3 that's the furthest away, or the furthest toward queening. Queen e6 was played. Carlsen is trying to generate a few more checks. I think it's important to note if white just tries to continue checking, like with queen b7, the black king could probably just start to run and make its way to the king's side, or to the queen's side to help queen the pawn. In a variation like this, I don't know, it might run out of checks. After queen e6, Karjakin found the last really important move, h5. And it was a move that people were so amazed that he found this during the game. All the engines were saying it was one of the only winning moves. But it's not actually that hard to find, because it's very important that you don't let the bishop outside the box. And so by playing h5, you sort of restrict the bishop's activity and you keep the king hemmed in. And that's the most important thing, is the activity of the white pieces, because if the white queen is the only one doing anything, it's no good. Here h4 was played, but it doesn't do much to solve any problems, because now you also give the knight the valuable g4 square. And so actually, after knight a2 was played, Carlsen just resigned. And it's always a little bit peculiar why strong players resign before the clear decisive material is won. But here we could figure it out. After a2, white has to capture that pawn because it's about to queen. And if queen takes a2, there's knight g4 check. And king h1 is actually out of the question because of queen c1 check. And it would just be a checkmate after bishop f1 and queen takes f1 mate. So king h3 would be the only move after the check. And after king h3, there's this amazing move, queen g1, which threatens queen h2 mate. And there's no real way to prevent this, because white actually runs out of checks remarkably quickly. This queen on g1 controls both the a7 square for check and the a1 square that the queen could check. So there's only queen b2 check here. And after queen b2 check, king g6, amazingly, there are no more checks. This queen on g1 controls the dark square b6, and the pawn on e4 is in the way of any of these other checks. So there'd be nothing to do to stop queen h2 mate except move the bishop. And after bishop f3, there's knight f2 as well. And this would just force the loss of the queen. And this would be easily winning. So, amazingly enough, in this position, after a2 and after 8 games of play, we finally have our decisive result. And surprise, surprise, it is Sergei Karjakin with the lead. Personally, I'm a little devastated. I'm going to be leaking my bias right now, but I just feel like Carlsen has been such a great world champion, and I don't think we actually realize how amazing it's been for the game of chess to have a Western champion. FIDE has a whole ton of problems. Agon has its problems, and I think that just sort of the monopoly that Russia had on the game for so long was finally released, and we are finally having more popularity around chess, more media attention, more coverage, more young faces in the game, and I don't feel like chess should go back to Russia. Just my opinion here, but that's just the way I feel, and I feel like this is really a historic and amazing day, because now, if Karjakin does what he's been doing so well throughout this match, just draw the rest of the games, he wins the match. And yeah, it's all this happened because Carlsen really pushed the envelope in positions that did not demand that. I said in previous videos, the only chance Karjakin has is if Carlsen changes the way he plays. And we saw in Game 8, we also saw in his last white game in Game 5, that he's starting to play moves and push the envelope that is uncharacteristic to his style because he's so desperate to find a win. And Karjakin has proved that he can defend, and he can defend, and that he'll take his chances when they come. In the press conference afterward, he said, it's more important that you play well than you play white. And someone actually brought it to my attention that against other Super GMs, 55% of his wins actually come with the black pieces. So he's always been a good, tenacious fighter, and he'll take his chances when they come. And I think psychologically he's won the battle against Carlsen thus far. That being said, Carlsen is still the better player. He just is. He's better in the opening. He's been better prepared in the middle game. He's been better prepared in the opening. He's been better in the middle game. He just hasn't put him away sometimes. And so I'm hoping that that can change in the last 4 games. But I almost want to say the 2 white games that Karjakin has are sort of out of the question as games that will be providing W's for Carlsen. So I'm really focusing on the last 2 white games that he has to really be the chance that he has to even the score. So a whole lot of pressure in the rest of these games to see if Carlsen is up to the task, or else we're going to have a new world champion. And what a year of upsets it's been. I mean, we had Brexit, we had Trump, or we have Trump. We had LeBron coming back from being down 3-1 in the finals. Never happened before. And now we have Karjakin on the precipice of victory. The last thing I'm going to point out is a lot of people were talking about Carlsen's handling of the post-game press conference, or lack thereof, really. He sort of just walked out on it. That is definitely not behavior suitable for the world champion. And who am I to say what's the right behavior and what's not the right behavior? It's just my opinion. I'm not the most important person in the world that these guys are thinking about. But you'd like to see him sort of compose himself in a better way than that, as however disappointing it may be. I think we do forget, though, how the passions are running so high, the tension is so high, and to ask someone questions about a devastating result right after it happens is really, really tough. But I'm going to give a hats off to actually Vishy Anand, our former world champion, because he would be in press conferences with Carlsen multiple games where he lost and he was asked, oh, what went wrong? Your chess moves weren't so good today. Did you see this? Did you see that? And he answered all of them with grace and humility and gratitude. And maybe that's something Carlsen can learn from. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for tuning in, and Game 9 is tomorrow, so stay tuned.